Welcome to the Pivot Point podcast. This season, I'm focused on sharing stories and ideas from experts on diversity and inclusion. In this episode, I will share some insights and ideas from my guest expert, Rachana Bhide. Together, we will leave you with some actionable tips to think about and discuss with your organization. We share this information because inclusive leadership is a journey. It requires bravery and, more importantly, courage, and you do not have to do it alone. At Next Pivot Point, I believe we are stronger. We are one. So this is a special guest. I know I say that a lot. I really, really mean it this time. Rachana and I had the chance to meet, like many people in the D&I space, over social media, and had a great phone conversation. And she introduced me to some amazing allies, of which I'm sure we'll talk about, our Athena Rising friends, Brad and Dave. Um, at first I was like, well, she kind of does what I do. And then you realize this is a collaborative space, not a competitive space. And so fast forward to today, a few years later, I have the thrill of introducing her and having a great conversation about diversity and inclusion. So a few things you should know about Rachana is she founded an initiative and a whole undertaking of story sharing called The Corner of the Court. And it's a really special place where it has real stories of inspirational women and their male allies. And she's going to talk about how she got that started here in a minute. But her brother was a huge inspiration. She started that in 2016. And the project has shown men can be and often are great supporters of women's careers when invited to the discussion in a positive way. So the mission there is to share success stories of men as allies from diverse, inspiring women, illustrating the power of gender partnership. Before all that, she has a 20-year leadership industry career. She worked at Bloomberg and Accenture, just to mention a couple of the companies, and really focused on workplace psychology. And now is officially out on her own, and she is an international marquee media expert. She facilitates conversations as an MC, a broadcaster, and headline keynote. And she's really fortunate that she's got a chance to interview some of the industry leaders, CEOs, global politicians, entrepreneurs, and movement makers, and is in front of big, big audiences talking about this important message. So I'm so thankful to have you, Rachana. Welcome.
Julie, thank you so much. And I was trying to suppress my delight as you were talking about how we met, because this really is, I think, just in and of itself a success story, if we can call it that, a self-proclaimed success story of allies bringing us together to do the work that we love. So thank you so much for having me.
Oh, of course, of course. And you were one of my first real allies. I was so lucky I got to meet you early on when I was writing How Male Allies Support Women for Gender Equality, and Corner of the Court was just taking off. And so we got to introduce each other to each other's networks and share the stories on your website as well as in my book. So it's just been such
Yeah.
a kind adventure. But, Rachana, tell us, how did you get into this line of work? How did you find your happy place in diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, so I'm a 20-year psychology workplace psychologist as my craft and my discipline, and um, really there's kind of three phases that led me to even thinking about D&I in the space that I've been practicing it specifically around male allyship. And so the first phase was just my own background. So growing up in Northern Virginia. There were not a lot of people of color, or I would say Indian families. My parents had immigrated from India and I was born in the States. But I was always sort of aware of how I grew up with one culture inside the household, and then it was a very different culture outside the household. That was always something that I feel like I was able to navigate until I went to college. And then when I went to university, which was also in Virginia, it's a really, I think, incredible time for young adults, and often still teenagers, when they go to school, to understand their identities. And for me, that was both exciting and also very difficult. It was really the first time that I looked at race and divides and natural groupings of people and how do humans behave. Certainly children when they're on their own after 18 years of socialization. And so that was sort of the first phase of just me understanding my own gender and I would say ethnic demographic and my place. The second chunk of what led me to doing this work was when I moved to Europe. And so now we're taking someone like me, if I use self as instrument, as we say in psychology, I looked at taking someone like myself and now putting myself in a completely different environment. And living in Europe, it was the first time that when someone would describe me, they would describe me not by my ethnicity as an Indian woman, they would describe me as an American. And I found that really interesting, that that was another segment of my identity that I didn't really think about until I left America and went to another country. So that was kind of the second chunk of it. And then when I came back to the States and I went to grad school, that's where a lot of things came together, because I had an academic understanding of in group, out group, how humans behave when they have no task and they simply walk around in, tribes, if we can use that word, what that looks like.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so for me, right. So for me, that really was when I said, even if I'm not a D&I expert or practitioner, the intersection with psychology and human behavior was so fascinating that it propelled me into this work. And then, of course, the anchor that I really have been learning about and putting out there has been around male allyship.
Yeah. Well, tell us about that. How did you get the idea for Corner of the Court, and how'd you get it started?
Well, in grad school, we had a thesis, and I was really drawn at the time to emotional intelligence and understanding how we can celebrate leaders who lead with empathy and lead with, I would say, even the feelings component of whether you look at Myers-Briggs or other personality assessments. There were a lot of men in my class in grad school, that in my cohort, that led with a lot of extraordinary emotional intelligence. And that was pretty new to me, to be able to appreciate that about men
Mm,
and their leadership styles. That felt very untraditional. And the thing that was even more striking to me was these men were in very traditionally masculine environments. They were in the army, they were officers, they were professional sports players, they were athletes. They were in tech. So for me to see a new, I'll use the word modern, although certainly men have been leading with these traits for a while, even if they're not traditionally how we see masculine traits. I saw them as really modern leaders, and that's what I wanted to research. And at the time, Julie, this was in 2014, 2015, this was still a pretty fresh concept of, we didn't use words like toxic masculinity. Me Too hadn't started.
yep.
So it was tough for me to find the right angle that companies would understand why I was researching this in the first place. And a lot of companies at the time were undertaking a lot of D&I work specifically around promoting and elevating women. And that was really where I saw that, okay, if I really want to understand men's leadership of others, could I start with how men are being great allies for women? Because that seemed like a very emotionally intelligent place to start. And so from there, that's where Corner of the Court happened, because the metaphor that I use when I first started speaking about my own story about men as allies was my brother, who was my tennis coach. And the story is that one day I was 12 years old and I was playing a pretty important tennis match, and my brother had been my coach all summer, and he didn't know any of this was happening at the time, but um I was struggling because I was playing a match against this boy that I had a crush on. And it was the first time that I really looked at myself as a girl and said, well, am I supposed to let this boy win so that he likes me? And
Oh,
it
wow.
was, it was, and we didn't really talk about those things. I mean, whether it's because I grew up in an Indian household, or just I had just turned 12, so I was coming into my own adolescence. But that was a very new thought for me, and so it was so salient that it stuck with me for years. And when I wound up telling my brother the story 25 years later, after I had done the research, after I'd done the thesis, I finally told my brother, "Oh, like you were my tennis coach," and I wound up really learning how to compete against boys. And by the way, I beat that boy, Evan, who I played that day,
Yay.
which was really
Happy
great.
ending.
Happy ending. And also I learned that, that boy never spoke to me after I beat him. And I thought we were, kind of, we're going to have this amazing summer romance. And it was a really kind of flip side of the coin lesson that there's going to be trade-offs with how you, Rachana, show up in the world as a girl, as a woman, and the choices you make to look at whether it's your career or sports or anything that you do. It's not going to be maybe as easy as it was for the boys, because I played on a team of all boys that summer.
Isn't that hard when you realize that for the first time, that it's not fair?
Yeah, and I think that it would have even been more. I think if I even had language, Julie, or
Right.
someone like you, or maybe even a woman coach, and of course, the project is celebrating my male coach, but having a woman coach who would have been able to help me process those feelings,
Mhm.
I think would have actually maybe even propelled me in a completely different direction, with respect to how I saw my self-confidence and how I moved around in the world. So yeah, I think that it would have even been nice to understand that actually, oh, that's not necessarily fair.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't make it okay, but this is a thing. It's a universal experience that women face that, you have the intersectionality, being a person of color as well. So there's so many wrinkles to this whole
Mhm.
diversity, these dimensions of diversity. Um,
Yeah, and as you ask that, Julie, if I may, just
Please.
say that what sparked in my head also is that, I mean, we right now, your listeners are only hearing my side of the story. They're not hearing Evan's side, or even maybe the boys who were watching this happen. What were they thinking?
Mhm.
So there's a lot of there was probably a lot of vulnerability on that tennis court that day, and certainly it wasn't just me experiencing it,
Yep.
which I think is also a latent reason why I wanted to research men as allies, and men in this way, because they have a complementary story that I think is really good information and data for all of us that are doing this work.
Oh, yeah. Masculinity is no picnic either.
Mhm. I
I
can
mean,
imagine.
the fact that we force these boxes, you and I know, studying gender in particular, that there's a lot of non-binary elements to gender, and it truly is a spectrum. And so once you acknowledge that and embrace that and let people operate freely of those extremes, like we're all better that way.
Mhm.
And I think that's the part of allyship that's interesting because you and I use that language around empathy and emotionally intelligent and self aware and vulnerable as allies. When you think about that list, that's not very masculine. Those aren't
Right.
traditionally gender socialized masculine traits. So a lot of times we're asking men to kind of leave behind some of those elements, your words, toxic masculinity, and embrace some more feminine kind of traits of leadership, which I think takes some time for people to get there. Now,
Mhm.
what was really great, I think, when we first met, and so I mentioned Brad and Dave at the beginning, I wanna make sure I give them a shout out. So, um,
Oh,
after
they
we
are
met,
the best.
aren't they the best? And so I think
Yes.
just thinking about, like, what does an ally do, they really demonstrate it for me as real life examples. So they are authors of a previous book, Athena Rising: How and Why Men Should Mentor Women, must read. They're actually updating it, and have a new Harvard Business Review, uh, a title coming out, I believe this spring. So I'll have to definitely share that more. But Brad Johnson, David Smith, amazing duo that focus on gender and mentorship, and their PhDs, they have military
Mhm.
experience. But
Yep.
they step out, they're on stages with Sheryl Sandberg and the likes of others, and you kindly introduced me to them. And wow, I mean, they have been endorsers of my work. They wrote a foreword for the last book. Just amazing, legit allies. So
Mhm.
thinking about them and all the men that you've met with Corner of the Court and the stories you've heard, what do you think it takes to be an ally? Like, what do you see as what traits does an ally have in common from your perspective?
Yeah, well, I think the thing that's really the headline, I would say, for Brad and Dave as two outstanding examples, is that they walk the talk. And so that comes, I think, from a place of self-confidence where they know deeply what it means to do the work, and then they do it. And I think the other piece that is potentially how folks like Dave and Brad, and then some of the men that I'll mention as examples from Corner of the Court, the things that they do really well, are that they they are they have hooked on to some emotional reason for why this is important. And when that is genesis of the action or the purpose that people are being driven by, then it doesn't need to be a huge program that a CEO instills in his company. It can be very simply making an introduction, or being willing to jump on the phone for 15 minutes and help someone explore an idea. And those are the powerful behaviors that Dave and Brad certainly did for us, and that a lot of the women on Corner of the Court are sharing as the career changer, or that pivotal moment
Mhm.
that she knew he was making an impact, and what she's grateful for.
Mhm.
So some examples for that. So what does it take? So first of all, I mentioned self-confidence. And then a lot of so that's really why Corner of the Court exists as well, which is by sharing stories of good examples and success stories. We show men that you're probably already doing some of these things for women in your life
Mhm.
already.
Mhm.
Here are some examples. It doesn't have to be, again, a big strategic program that you implement at a company that you need positional power for. You can be a husband, you can be a coach of your daughter's team, you can be a first boss and do very, very simple things that make a huge impact. So some of the behaviors that I've seen have been opening up a network and making an introduction. Another set of examples come from people who've said, I hadn't ever thought of myself as a blank. So I was working in recruiting and I never saw myself as a salesperson, but this ally that I had just pushed me and asked me
Mhm.
3 times, like, what is it that we're afraid of? Or have you ever thought about going into sales? And it's often even the very, when the women describe the stories to me, they'll be talking about physically where they were and what that felt like. And so it can be pretty breakthrough, even if it's just a simple question that can
Mhm.
generate possibilities. I think the other piece of it that we've seen from the stories themselves is that the men who do this work truly are humble. And I don't know that we can teach humility through DNI and through Corner of the Court, but we do show that there's a really incredibly generous side to men when they can share their expertise and when they can um, get acknowledged for making an impact. I think all humans are like that. But
Mhm.
the really additional kind of amazing thing that's happened when women tell the stories is when they share it with their male ally. Our
Mhm.
website's a very public way to share it, but then when they forward the story on or give a heads up, I mean, people shed tears. They tell me about how it's opened up, an even more deeper emotional connection. And so that's also, I think, if men are willing to be vulnerable and go there and almost even accept the love and the
Mhm.
appreciation that the women give, then I think really powerful things happen. And I
Yeah.
can give you some examples. I'm mindful of your
Yeah.
questions, but I can give you some examples also if you'd like some.
And our listeners love stories. I just want to make sure to kind of reiterate a key theme that you
Mm,
highlighted here that I absolutely agree with. It's the subtle acts. It's not the grand gesture. And that's what allies do. And you gave some really great examples of that 15-minute phone call and introduction. If you see someone get interrupted in a meeting saying something, it's those little things that really add up. And I think that's what's complex about this work is that women on the receiving end, like you said, feel all these great feelings and gratitude. And I think men on the other end don't even know that they did something good.
yeah, yeah,
That's why your work is so important to highlight those stories and give recognition. And a lot of our allies are so humble that I'll say, "Oh my gosh, please let me repay the favor or let me do something for you because I just feel indebted." And they
hmm
always tell me it wasn't a big deal, Julie. Geesh, like move on. And I'm thinking, yes, it was.
yes,
So it's kind of a
yeah,
conundrum. We get stuck in this, like, we recognize them, but then they don't seem to really want it. And
yeah, yes.
like, can we clone you? Can you make other men like you?
Yes, totally. And I think that's, when sometimes we do conferences or we speak and get asked, well, how do I find an ally? What do I do to
Yeah.
find an ally? And it's almost similar to when people, say, how do I find a mentor? Or how do I find someone? And a
Yep, I
lot
get
of
that one a
it,
lot.
yeah, I bet. And a lot of it is that it comes from a really natural place. Like people gravitate to mentors because they know that their mentor sees them and that the mentor sees some potential in them. I mean, it's very similar to allies, and men acting in, in an advocacy way on behalf of women, whether that's as a mentor or a sponsor or an ally or a husband or a friend. It comes from a natural place. So I think the other piece of this, which is really why I mention that I'm a psychologist so often, is that doing this work is also sort of retraining us potentially to think about, it's not about finding who the ally is. It's about making awareness right now of who's in my life and what things have they been doing for me that have contributed to the mosaic of my own stories, and then reinforcing that. So it's kind of teaching mindfulness and self-awareness.
Yep.
And then it goes back again to then that really is what makes a good ally
Yep.
himself.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. That's good stuff, Rachana. Well, you said you were going to tell us a story. What stories do you have?
So I've got a few. The first one I have to start with is you, Julie, and this is not gratuitous. It's because I had set up the website and the platform, and the first set of stories that women were sharing with me were about first bosses. A few women wrote about their older brothers, and you were the first one to write about your husband.
Yeah.
And that was a really big turning point for a few reasons. One is because looking at the project, I'm always really keen to see who are women writing about, so that we can, all the stories then inform sort of the zeitgeist and what's happening. And so no one had written about their husbands. And so when you shared that story, it really helped me open up that conversation with people about allyship. And one piece of feedback that I got in particular, not about your story, but after we had a few stories about fathers and husbands, specifically those two relationships, a gentleman from a very, very well-known think tank. This is not a bad story by any means, but he does a lot of men as allies work. He reached out to me, and we jam and talk about this topic a bit. And he said, Rachana, he's like, I really, I like the stories and everything. He said, but I don't think it counts if a woman is writing about her husband or her dad as her ally. I mean, he
I know
loves
we're
her,
keeping
so
score.
so he loves her. So of course he's going to be her ally. And that made me think, and I said, wow, okay. Well, I didn't really come from a culture where that's the case. So,
Sure. Yeah. You're like, that's something we're taking for granted.
yeah. And so that was a really honest, and that alone, the fact that he could share that with me, and that I bet I would say probably 10 years ago, I would have probably taken that personally and
Mhm.
defended it. And it was actually, no, let me use his feedback to generate, well, why is that? And that made me think about a broader, more cultural view of allyship. And so we have not done a significant amount of cross-cultural stories on the platform, but one that we did that was really well received, and certainly I would even say fueled a lot of my own personal interest, was that we did a partnership with an author who wrote a book called Wonder Girls in India. And it was all about women, not specifically male allies, but women in India who had gone their own way to forge paths for themselves in astronomy and neurosurgery. As athletes, she had a professional rugby player. So all of these women, and a few of them would write about the impact of male allies. And when I repurposed some of their stories and we shared them on our platform, it was really tremendous for me also to see that there are men who are in a culture where just the society might necessitate that, even if he had spent his whole life wanting his daughter to be a physician, societal norms necessitated that once she turned 22, he was obligated to make sure that she was married. And so these are not also, so it helped me also see the complexity of how the men as allies in a different culture, and in this case in India, which is my home culture, also what they the amount of conviction that they had to be allies for women in a place that maybe the culture was not necessarily as willing. And again, and I say that about my own culture, not because it's bad. And that's the other thing, is nothing is bad or good. It's just this is the system that we operate in. So that was, I think, the second set of stories that really struck me, was the cross-cultural ones. And then I think the third one is that it's really goes back to the business case. And I lead a lot of my work around not so much the business case, but relationships and the emotional side of relationships that drive allyship. But this one was a really great example of how a really amazing product could go to market to a much broader swath of people because of allyship. So it's a very recent story on the website, and I didn't even realize this till just now. It's the name of the company is Ally Shoes, and it is a women's, yeah. And so actually that's how I got introduced to her, was through a mutual colleague who said, oh, there's something here with allyship that could be a possibility, you two should meet. And Samantha Dong is the founder. Her brand is called Allies because they want the shoes to be, these are comfort high heels, to be every woman's ally in the boardroom, on her wedding day, on a date. And her coach and her advisor was an industry veteran who he himself knew that, yeah, I've never walked in a woman's high heels before, so
can't be in your shoes.
literally can't be in your shoes, exactly. And then the empathy for what it's like when women walk in high heels, he knew he didn't have that, so he introduced her, Samantha, the founder, to two women, one who is a designer and one who is a podiatrist, surgeon. And the three of these women now became the coalition of founders for this shoe brand. And the real magic that happened was I tried on one of their shoes, which was a nude color. And for me, as a woman of color, nude was always, I mean, it was never my shade. It was always like 3 shades lighter than my actual skin. But because this team was so diverse themselves, so Samantha is Asian and her two co-founders are African American and Latina, when they went to put a nude color shoe to market, they said, well, we can't just make one shade. We have to make at least 3. And they wound up making 5. So his allyship and his introduction of his network in such a generous way has literally like deployed a shoe to my closet that finally fits me. And I think that that's just an incredible, it's a business outcome, it's humanity, and it also really shows that we don't lose anything by being generous with introductions or knowledge.
Yeah. I know. I think sometimes people think givers are doormats, but those that give, that positive karma you create in the universe, I truly
Mm-hmm.
believe in that. And that's what our allies understand intuitively. What a
Yeah.
great story. I joke a lot of times because we both talk about empathy in the workplace and as a key ingredient for an ally, that you can't be in someone else's shoes, like that old adage about empathy, but put yourself in their shoes. And like, but you physically can't do that. So instead, let's just take on their perspective, even though we have no idea where they're coming from. Why don't we just do
Mm-hmm.
that instead? So it's funny, full circle with your story. And I often say too, if women designed shoes, they'd be a lot more comfortable.
I know. I know. And that's also, you picked up on the walking in the shoes. Admittedly, I had thought about the metaphor, but I hadn't developed it to that length. So you really picked up on that. And the other piece that I think is really intuitive that you picked up on is actually, I hadn't realized that the footwear industry is very male
Mhm.
dominated.
Oh, every
So
industry is, right?
yeah,
It's
right.
funny when people tell me that, I'm like, "So there's no such thing as a female-dominated industry. You know that, right?"
That's a really strong awareness. And again, this is just also shows, I think, that I would never have even have had that soundbite if I didn't get a chance to hear it from you. And geographically, we live in different parts of the country.
Yeah.
The types of clients that you work with, I don't get a chance to access, and so that's really helpful for me to hear as well.
Well, same here. Same here. I love your stories. And listeners, please, please, please go to Corner of the Court Project. It's filled with great stories and examples. And one of the things, you talked about earlier is, you don't have to roll out some formal ally program at your company. Now, if you want one, we have some ideas. But I think the simple things, find some resources, share them however you share information on your Slack channel, on your learning management system, wherever it's appropriate in your workplace, and just come prepared to talk about a story or watch a TED Talk together and have a conversation. The little
Mhm.
displays of allyship do not need to be complex, and you have such great, rich stories that paint that picture for people. So I'm so thankful for your work, Rachana, and your time today. We're kind of towards the end of time, but I want to ask you if you had to prioritize one thing. So I love asking people. And you get this on stage, like, what's one thing I can do? It's not that easy. It's always what I want to say, but we got to meet our allies where they're at, right? And we're all allies in training. So if there was something you could offer to our listeners to help them be more of an ally or to engage allies, what would be one thing you'd recommend?
Um, so a lot of it is mental and in a mindset. And so I think the mindset to anchor around is that nothing is zero sum in allyship. And if we can, a practical behavior would be to think about looking around where you have seen, 1 + 1 = 3, because that is what I have seen Corner of the Court evolve into. It is as much a story or as much a set of stories about allyship as they are illustrating that a woman's success, in our case, does not need to be compromised by acknowledging that a male ally has made an impact. And at the same token, we're continuing that line of thought, a male or a man's impact does not have to be compromised if he is supporting a woman in the
Mhm.
workplace. And so the zero sum thinking is really, I think, probably the foundation of why we don't get this right.
Yep.
And then, therefore, when we're talking about allyship, DNI in the workplace, and meeting people where they are, Julie, thank you for saying that in the way that you did, because then when we talk about DNI, we have to really offer everyone's perspective. And when we think about offering everyone's perspective in a way that everyone can, and it can be done privately. I mean, I've seen as one tactic, we've allowed everybody at the beginning of a workshop to look at 4 options of how they might be feeling at that time. And they range from, and it's only 4 options, and they range from, I'm super excited to be in this diversity and inclusion training, to I don't want to be here. And we don't ask them to share, but we say, whatever you feel about this topic, you are absolutely justified in feeling.
Mhm.
But the only thing we ask is that you take note of what you're feeling and take note so that you can engage in a productive way. And then we pivot into another activity where everyone in the room gets to share their own diversity story. And rather than
Yeah.
writing it out and reading it themselves, they swap it and someone else
Oh,
in.
I love that.
Yeah, I got that actually from the Better Man conference.
Yeah.
And that was really, that's been where I've seen, and this is not based on the website, but a story, I've seen a lot of stories of men, because a lot of the audiences that I work with when I do this particular exercise are predominantly men, and it's all anonymous. But when you have, let's say, a white man reading an Indian man's story,
Oh, yeah.
um, out loud about how when they came to this country, and they read it in the way that the original author or the original participant wrote it. So it's a really powerful way to show empathy. And once we do that, I think the men in the room, and everybody in the room,
Mhm.
feels like they have a contribution to make. So
Yep.
that's the other piece. If you're organizing things like this, really find creative ways to let people be themselves and safe.
Yeah. Oh, that's good stuff. I love the diversity story sharing
Mm,
and a good diversity story, right? It's like time when you were different and feel like you belong.
mm,
This whole tribal mentality you were talking about up front. So I love
mhm,
like getting the mindset around allyship and eliminating that zero sum game and then having good interaction, good healthy interaction that gets those feelings out on the table, but also puts people in a position of safe vulnerability where they're sharing things about themselves. And then it's really easy to learn once you're in that safe, vulnerable state. All right. Sometimes I call it the brave space because it's not always safe. You know, if it was safe, it'd be easy. But brave, and
mhm,
sometimes you have to wrap some comfort around that just to keep people protected because it's hard. I mean, this stuff, if it was easy, we'd be doing all of this.
mhm.
We'd
Yeah,
already be there, but we're not. We got some work to do. Well,
yeah.
Shauna, it's been such a gift to spend time with you today. Tell our listeners, how can they follow you? How can they get in touch with you?
Well, thank you so much, Julie, for the time. And hi to all your listeners again. Cornerofthecourt.com is where all of our stories are. We do most of our sharing on LinkedIn and Instagram. So, Corner of the Court on Instagram. And then, anyone, please, I'm super happy to hear from followers. So, you can always add me on LinkedIn. And if you have a story to share, I'm always really keen to hear it. So, and really, Julie, you use the word gift, and that's truly what I think this work has been for me, and getting to know you. I mean, I have to say, you're kind of all over my apartment here. I've got your magnet, I've got your 2 books. So you're,
I know, it's funny, we have not met face to face, we need to fix that, we need a New York trip, like, that I wouldn't mind coming and actually hanging out at your apartment.
it's we don't have the, I don't have the real estate that I think they do in other places, but even the studio apartment is welcoming. And again, you really are all over it. You're on my refrigerator with the magnet, and
Oh,
it's a real gift to be able to chat with you today about this.
same here, Rashana, thank you so much, I so appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Did you know that you can find all 5 seasons of our 50 plus episodes at nextpivotpoint.com? And you can sign up for a complimentary 7-day preview of our new program, Lead Like an Ally, and purchase your book, our new book, Lead Like an Ally. I appreciate you listening to this episode. Who do you know that needs to hear this message? Simply hit the share button. Connect with me on LinkedIn at Julie Kratz, Kratz. I host this podcast because I believe we are stronger together. We are one.